Good evening and welcome to Information Please, your Peoria Public Library on the air, bringing you information about your library and your community. And this evening my guest is David Tuttle, who's the manager of Peoria's Emergency Information. Hi, David.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, for once we're not having emergency right at this moment, so
That's
you could come. There's been a lot of those lately.
Yes.
But you're in charge of our 911 system, right?
Right, I manage the City of Peoria's Emergency Communication Center. We are staffed with a minimum of 7 employees that work 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow. So they do get a day off once in a while, don't they?
Yep.
This seems like it would take, to me, always somebody who's sort of a very special person. What do you look for when you're looking for people to be 911 operators or whatever? Do you call them operators that answer?
We call them either operators, dispatchers, or telecommunicators.
Okay.
We're looking for people that are able to multitask, that are able to do several things at a time, talk, eat, think, all at the same time, type. We want people that can type at least 45 words a minute with 10 errors or less, and people that are willing to take control of a situation and not be rattled by something that they may hear on the phone. So it does take a special person that's able to answer a 911 call and then go on to the next call for service. So we are presently looking for additional staff. The city offered an early retirement in the fall of 2011, so we're working still to replace those vacancies. And we've had some success at that, but we still have some vacancies open at this time. And we test about every 3 weeks. It consists of a typing test, a computerized test for dispatchers, and then an assessment test. And then they have to observe in the dispatch center, and then they're interviewed, and then there's a background check.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable for a job with that much responsibility. We're all so grateful. I mean, I remember when there wasn't a 911 system. I think everybody's really grateful for the 911 system. How long has it been in Peoria now? Do you know?
Peoria actually had what we call basic 911 that started in January of 1976. And then in 1988, there was a referendum that went to the voters to ask the voters to put a tax on the phone bill that would be 80 cents that would allow for creation of an emergency telephone system board, which I also am on, that allows money to be collected and then spent for equipment. That referendum passed by a 75% margin, and then in 1989 this board was created that allows us to spend money on equipment. So in June of 1993 we went to what's called Enhanced 911, which allows the caller's name, phone, and address to appear on the 911 screen for the dispatcher. And then in 2001 we started answering wireless 911 calls. And right now cell phones are about 76% of our business for 911 calls. It used to be back in 2001 that most of the cell phones were highway-related incidents. Now the cell phone has pretty much replaced the landline phone, which has created several issues. One is, while we can locate the caller on a wireless 911 call within about 250 meters, it's not as exact as what a landline call would be. So when possible, if somebody has a choice, they should always use a landline phone to call 911. If that's not possible, then a wireless phone works just fine. We just may not know the exact location that you're calling from. It'll pinpoint within about 250 meters.
So people should try and tell you where they are if it's at all possible.
Right. The first thing that we're going to say when we answer 911 is we're going to say, Peoria 911, where is your emergency? And a couple reasons for that. First of all, we want the caller to know what 911 center they've reached.
Right.
The second thing we want them to know is we need their location. So we need to know whether it's on the street, if it's a house, whether it's an apartment, and then we can go from there as to what the actual problem is.
So if somebody is out on the highway, they could actually be in another jurisdiction Does yours cover Peoria County or just the city of Peoria?
We cover Peoria County. Other than the cities of Chillicothe, Bartonville, and Peoria Heights, which have their
Okay.
own dispatch centers. So any caller in Peoria County, whether they're in the city of Peoria or in Elmwood or Princeville or Hannah City or Glassford, those calls come to us. But wireless 911 calls are routed to dispatch centers based on the location that cell site is hitting with their phone. So if I call 911 and I'm at Lake and Knoxville, for example, depending on what cell site I'm at, the call could actually go to Peoria or Peoria Heights.
I see.
So it's very important that the caller listen to what center they've reached. They may not necessarily know what jurisdiction they're in, and we can help them with that. So cell phones are directed by the cell site tower and where we believe that coverage is for that particular tower.
Interesting. It's very interesting. Yes, I remember, and this has been quite a while ago, but I had a phone call from an elderly relative who was basically dying, had a stroke and was dying.
Right.
But I was in another county, and so you dial 911 and you get that 911 center, and I had to have them call the Peoria one to get ambulance dispatched.
Right, and that is actually fairly common, where
Is
a
it?
family member will call 911, and we will do everything we can to help them get to the right 911 center. Sometimes that's a little bit difficult depending on, you don't necessarily know who covers that particular area, so we'll kind of usually start at the county, or if you know what the city is, then we'll go through the city at that point in time.
Yeah, I think it's just the way the system's set up. You can't reach anybody but where you are, and if you're calling for somebody someplace else, then...
Right, it's pretty much set up to hit the 911 center closest to where you're at, which normally is going to be the agency that's going to dispatch the police, fire, EMS, or sheriff to your location. Not always the case, but typically that's how it works. We have a lot of issues in the downtown area where the calls may go to East Peoria, or in East Peoria along the river, the calls may come to us. So we're very good at transferring those calls back and forth as needed to the two communities.
It's great to have that kind of interworking between, and that's the kind of thing that in a big emergency like the Washington or Tazewell County tornadoes that really has helped people being able to work together and send things back and forth. Right. How many calls do you normally get in a day?
We get about 900 phone calls a day. About
Wow.
300 of those are 911 calls. And a lot of that will vary. On a Sunday, typically, other than the day of the Washington tornado, we answer double that. But normally, it's 250 or 225 to 250 on a Sunday, for example. But on a snowstorm or ice storm or severe weather or some other, 4th of July is typically our busiest day.
Wow.
We'll answer anywhere from 425 to 450 911 calls those particular days. But most of the time it's right around the 300, 325, and then about 550 to 650 non-emergency calls. So a lot of it varies based on the weather. Full moon sometimes seems to have something to do with that. Not real sure why, but we seem to get a few more calls on a full moon night than what we would on a non-full moon.
I think the library staff would agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
A full moon can cause some
Right.
interesting things to happen.
Right.
Maybe someday somebody will actually pin down what that effect is.
Exactly.
So what does your staff do when there's bad weather and people can hardly get around? And
Normally thankfully most of our staff is able to get to work. We have, our public works department is great, and they will actually come out and get our employees and take them home if it's absolutely necessary. And I would say that may happen maybe once every 2 to 3 years, depending on the snowstorm. The snowstorm that we had 2 or 3 years ago, where we had 16 or 17 inches, that would have been one of those mornings where some of our staff members would have had to be picked up from home. So thankfully we have that relationship with our public works department where they're willing to go out and pick up our essential employees.
right.
So that is an issue, and we force over as little as possible But sometimes you have to do that at least briefly until the other person can get to work.
Yeah, because I imagine that's fairly exhausting, and you need to go home and,
Right.
and get away.
Yeah, right. They work an 8-hour shift. The
Mhm.
supervisors on duty typically work a 12-hour shift, but they work an 8-hour shift, and it is a very busy center. It'll go from really nothing going on to sheer chaos to nothing going on. So it kind of goes back and forth. And it really, I'm not sure what the trends are. Sometimes on a very cold evening like we had recently with the 14 degree below zero, we had a lot of broken pipes. We had people falling, so there were, and then vehicle crashes. So again, the weather really plays quite a role in how busy the center is.
Yeah, I imagine it does. How is your center, well, we talked a little bit about how it was funded, but are you part of the city budget, or do you have something separate just with the phone bills you talked
Sure.
about?
The city of Peoria is the responsible party for the Emergency Communications Center. The staffing is all paid for by the city of Peoria. All of our staff members are city employees. The county of Peoria pays the city for the sheriff's dispatching, and has since 1979. We've had a consolidated center since 1979, which has actually worked very well. It allows us to be able to communicate between the city and county seamlessly, especially on the borders. So that works very well. We also dispatch most all of the volunteer fire departments and ambulances, and then we coordinate communication with Advanced Medical Transport, which has their own dispatch center, but we communicate with them and then dispatch ambulances through them. So that works out real well. Now the funding itself, that the personnel is paid for out of the city budget, but all of the equipment for the most part is paid for by the tax that appears on the phone bill. Then there's an additional tax that the state of Illinois has put on wireless phone bills, which is 73 cents. 58 cents of that actually comes to the county's Emergency Telephone System Board. So between the 80 cents and the 58 cents, those two amounts come to the Emergency Telephone System Board, and they provide the equipment that is in the dispatch centers. Everything from the radio system to the phone system to the chairs that the dispatchers sit on.
Okay. Chairs are good.
Chairs are very important. Chairs are a big deal.
Yeah, chairs are a big deal for all that. So how often do you have to upgrade the equipment? I mean, do you go through just constantly changing things, or do you ever stop and do a complete rollover because something's so new and so good?
Right now, we are in the process of developing a brand new county-wide public safety trunked radio system. And this radio system is the biggest change in radio communications for public safety in our county in 40 years.
Wow.
So that system will be rolling out by summer of this year.
Okay.
That'll have an impact on pretty much everyone, but it will allow all the responders to be on the same system and be able to communicate with each other. So like a sheriff's deputy will actually be able to communicate direct to a Peoria police officer. A Peoria police officer could technically communicate direct with a Peoria firefighter or with a county firefighter or something like that. So there will be a lot of interoperability that will be available. We'll have linkage to the state radio system and that sort of thing too.
Oh, that's
so
great.
that we'll be able to communicate all on the same platform. So that is a big change coming for the radio system. The telephone equipment, we will need to upgrade that probably in the next several years, mostly for what we call next generation 911. And that will allow callers to be able to text message and send video and pictures to the dispatchers. There's really pros and cons to that.
Right.
There are several trials going on around the country for text messaging. Where text messaging really shines and where it's greatly needed is for the hearing and speaking impaired community.
Right.
And it's so important that we be able to offer that service direct without going through a relay service. But for the citizens that are able to communicate and hear, we really, even once the text messaging system would be available, we would really prefer that if they have an emergency to make a voice call, because we're able to ask the questions that we need to ask and they're able to give us the information. So texting really would be something that would be secondary for people that are able to speak and hear okay. But for the hearing impaired community and speaking impaired community, that's obviously a lifesaver. So that's something that we're definitely wanting to do, and hopefully within the next several years we'll be able to offer that service in our county.
Well, I know during a serious emergency, often you can't get through on phones, but texting still works. So is that another advantage, or do you not see it that way? Like if like the day of the tornado, so many people couldn't get through on the phone, but they could still text.
Right. Yeah, there are different pathways that the different networks use as far as, texting, as you said, goes a different path than what voice calls. And then landline calls typically are the most reliable. But in the case of the Washington tornado, they had phone company issues.
Right.
So they had a lot of other issues that were involved in landline phones that may not always be there. But the bottom line is systems are somewhat easily overloaded. So in that case, really the best way to do it is the way you can get through. And offering several methods, whether it be a voice call or a text, really is advantageous. So we're hoping that that'll also be possible in the future.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, I don't think most people could imagine the world at this point without 911. And I know during the New York terrorist attacks, one of the things that came to light was the fact that nobody could talk to anybody else. So I imagine this radio system is some of the result of that. And of course, things take a long time to happen, and the technology, the funding, everything takes a long time. But if that tornado could have easily hit in 2 or 3 counties rather than just the one, and so what a great advantage to be able to talk back and forth no matter what's going on. You just don't know what's going to happen these days.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So is there any lighter side at all to the 911 business?
Our staff enjoys being able to help people. Every day is a little bit different, which is what makes the job exciting for the staff. We really don't know from day to day, for the most part, what's going to happen.
Sure.
So it's not like a job where you go in and you do task A and it's always task A. We really don't know what that task A is going to be for the most part. That could all be driven by a large fire or a large crash or a building collapse or a police incident, a barricaded subject or something like that. So a lot of things occur that we don't have control over, of course, and we have to react to those, and we have to have the staff that's available to do that. One of the things that's been kind of exciting that the city has installed recently has been the ShotSpotter system.
Yes.
And there's sensors throughout the southwest portion of the city that basically listen for gunfire, and then it goes into the ShotSpotter call center. They then determine the number of shots and the location by triangulation, and then they send that through a network connection to our dispatchers. And within about 40 to 45 seconds, we receive that information, and the officers actually receive it in their cars also.
That's great.
So then we're able to send the officers to where the actual shots were fired. And we've had some success in locating not only shell casings, but individuals responsible. So that's been an exciting system that the city has recently installed, and hopefully will have a great effect in reducing the overall crime.
Yeah, my understanding with that is that it helps you sort out, was it a car backfiring, fireworks, which that could help on the 4th of July too, or it was an actual shot, and avoids the some dude thing, because that's what Chief Settings Guard was told us, that that it's always some dude, but the
So true.
ShotSpotter can often pin it down and get you much closer, and really in the end save a lot of time and money and investigation and wasted resources, so you're not investigating a car backfiring.
Right, and the call center for ShotSpotter has been very good about trying to decipher whether it's a firework, backfire, or an actual gunshot. When we reviewed the system, I was able to go up to Minneapolis with some representatives from the police department, and we were actually able to see the system live in action there. So, and I know the mayor and city manager and police chief went to some other communities and looked at it also. So we had a good grasp of what the system would be able to do, and it's really been embraced by the staff members as a really good tool.
Well, it'll be interesting years from now, when there's plenty of data to see what happened with concealed carry and spot shot are all kind of coming into play at the same time,
Right.
be able to determine what's actually going on with our crime scene here in Peoria. And
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, have you actually been behind the answering of calls? And for how long have you done that? You mentioned you'd been with it a long time.
I've been with the Emergency Communications Center almost 31 years, and I started in 1983 as a very young dispatcher, and I worked third shift for 10 years. So I have the knowledge of doing the job for 10 years.
Yeah,
and then,
probably at a rough time when probably have a lot go on at night.
Right. Third shift is a unique shift to work. It's as long as you can get your sleep, it's a great shift. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved up through to a supervisory position, and then I've been manager since 1995.
Okay. If somebody's interested in going into this kind of field, what sort of education and things do they need, and how should they prepare?
The first thing they need to be able to do is type. They have to be able to type at least 45 words a minute, and we would like that to be number-letter combinations, so not just the dog jumped over the fence type thing. We want them to be able to type number-letter combinations. I've also been working with Illinois Central College with other people also in developing a telecommunicator class for 911. And we just finished our second semester of that, and our class will begin on January 27th at ICC North. So that prepares people to be a 911 telecommunicator, not just for Peoria, but technically for any of the area dispatch centers, who are all in need of quality employees, not just us. So there is a nationwide shortage, quite honestly, of 911 dispatchers, not just in the city of Peoria. So, because it does take unique people that are willing and able to do that. So that would be the first thing. You have to have a clean criminal record. We don't hire anybody that has a felony conviction. So that's sometimes through the process, we may find something that does not allow us to hire that particular individual. So I would say typing is the number one thing, typing and spelling, and then being able to do multitask, and consider the 911 telecommunicator class at Illinois Central College if it's a field that you're interested in doing, and then apply at our Human Resources Department at City Hall on the 4th floor. And we review those applications about every 3 weeks, and we get a lot of applications.
Do you?
And then we do testing about every 3 weeks.
Do you have tips for parents on how to teach their children to use 911 appropriately?
The children should be taught at an early age to be able to call 911. There's been situations not only in our center but throughout the country where children have had an impact on a family member since they've been able to call 911. So I think it's very important that they understand when to call 911 if mom or dad or sister or brother are injured or hurt, or they smell smoke, or they see something going on that shouldn't be, to call 911. But they also need to be taught that it's not a toy.
Right.
One of the problems that we've had with 911 throughout the country is the FCC mandated that wireless cell phones, even though they're not connected to a network, can still call 911. So when you get a new phone and your old phone is sitting in the play box or the toy box or your drawer at your house, as long as the battery is charged, it can still call 911 and it shows your old phone number. So unfortunately, we do get a fair number of children that play on cell phones that mom or dad or sister or brother no longer use, that still is capable of calling 911. So we would ask parents, if at all possible, to take the batteries out of those phones if they're going to be used as a toy in a toy box or something like that. So that's one of the steps that we would ask mom and dad.
That's interesting, and I bet that's something most people haven't heard of or don't know.
It generates a good number of calls into 911 every month, and so it takes up staff time, it takes up valuable resources, communicating when there really is no emergency.
Right, right.
So,
and how does your system work at all with? There's a lot of elderly people who have the Lifeline type systems that press a button or whatever.
You know, Lifeline, as more and more of our population is home, right, and of course we would all much prefer as we get older to be home rather than in some sort of facility.
Right.
Lifeline type systems are very valuable because they not only contact the emergency centers, but they also contact family members to respond and have key information and patient information and that sort of thing. I think it's very important that, you know, people that are not, you know, falls really result in many of the injuries, and people lay there for periods of time. You know, let's say you go check in on your mother or father that's elderly, and you do that every day at 5 o'clock on your way home from work. Well, nothing's to say at 5:30 when you leave that they don't fall and they're there until 5 o'clock the next day. So it's very important that they either have a cordless phone, a cell phone, or they wear the pendant for the Lifeline device. Lifeline actually works very well. What happens is when you press the button, they attempt to communicate with the person, and then they'll call us and indicate that there's a medical alarm, which we get those every single day. And then we send the fire and EMS and police to check on the individual. And many times they are valid. In fact, more times valid than not. They're not like a burglar alarm or something like that.
Yeah,
where,
that there can be false.
Where somebody, you know, a dog or a cat or a bird or something has set that off. Most of the time, these are valid alarms.
Okay. David, we're out of time, but thank you so very much. I've provided a lot of valuable information, I think, for people to better understand how our 911 system works.
Well,
so thank you for joining me. Yeah. We have a lot going on at Peoria Public Library, and on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see David's broadcast after it's been on our local cable channel, but you can also find a lot more on that channel, and you can see all of our events at peoriapubliclibrary.org. We'll see you next week on Information Please.